What did you think?
Wow. There was like a reverence around his ability to transcend all of those experiences and to keep showing up with such energy and enthusiasm and commitment to the cause. And then this kind of curiosity about from that position of deep insight, what he thought were the things that would change trajectories. And we kept coming back to this point around early intervention and being able to recognise and reconcile and put things in place as when people are younger.
Having left when I was 4, according to my file, because I was on the at-risk register, we had 126 visits by the social workers, so the authorities knew how bad it was. I don't think I knew how bad it was until I actually got hold of that file myself about 10 years ago and just read about what was going on for Mum. So, after Mum died, brought up by my father, who was, let's say, ill-equipped. Not only did we have that trauma before Mum died, then we had the traumatic event of my Mum being murdered, then it's a public event, then we've got my father, and I was a child with ADHD who was punished for being impulsive. And I don't mean this in some kind of egotistical way. It's a wonder that I made it through that when you consider it, all the things that I had to endure.
On that point, Richard, it's like when we think about adverse childhood experiences, so often the story is not one of your, doesn't look like your story. So Richard, if we're going to just start with you introducing yourself, just giving you to camera just a couple of lines that gives a flavour of your work, and then we'll dive straight into the lion's share of the conversation, which is how do you relate to the field of trauma, mental health and wellbeing?
So I am Richard McCann. I am a best-selling author. I've written 5 books, and I'm a motivational speaker. But most importantly, I am a father of 3 wonderful ginger children.
Great. So you join us today. Obviously, we're going to just talk a little bit how you relate to that field of trauma, mental health, and wellbeing. But it might be good if you start with how you got to this space. I know Araminta and I know a little bit about your story, but for our listeners who perhaps don't, can you contextualize the conversation for us?
First of all, how I got into this space was I wrote a book about my life, a life that I was embarrassed about and ashamed of for many years. I wrote this book 21 years ago, and that was the start of a completely change of direction in my life, where people began to ask me to share my experiences, the experiences that I'd written about. And for those that might be tuning in that are unaware of what I've been through, I guess it's not unique, but my introduction to trauma, I suppose, was a week before my 6th birthday when we lost my mum. We lost my mum who'd been out drinking and never came home. And she thumbed a lift by Peter Sutcliffe. And I don't know how far and wide this goes. So Peter Sutcliffe became a serial killer in the north of England who murdered 13 women. My mum, Wilma McCann, was the first of 13 women to die. Not that I knew back then what trauma was, or even when I first started my speaker journey or writing about my book, I didn't know about trauma in the way that I do now. There's so much out there, rightfully so, but I just know about trauma because I lived it as a child. So that's what I became known for in my writing and in my speaking. There are different versions of my talks, but the one that I'm being asked to share more recently, is education to educators to help inform them or maybe remind them of what they already know, because many of them are trauma informed now. But just it's a real life example of what can happen, the impact of trauma, but also what helped. Of course, that's what we're speaking about. What helped me navigate that very difficult start in life, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah, and I think that's a great place to start. And obviously, it's as a 6-year-old child, if you don't mind, like talking about the kind of experience that you kind of went through as that 6-year-old, kind of what was the support that you had, if any, of the people around you, and what happened there?
Well, actually, just backtrack a little bit. Before Mum was killed, we had a difficult time on the estate anyway. We were subjected to domestic violence, physical violence, neglect, in fact, all the 10 that are in the original ACE study in 1995. I know it's been expanded since, but those original 10 adverse childhood experiences, we experienced them all. But I think the main thing that was experienced as a child was the fragility, the uncertainty in the household, the violence and the beatings and dad leaving and boyfriends. It was chaos. But I had my mum, obviously, till that fateful day. And I think the love that I received from my mum has served me well. And I think I may have even got a little bit more love and nurturing than the others, because there was 3 sisters and me, so I was the only boy. I think despite that chaos, I still, I guess, got enough love to see me through. And after Mum died, we went to a children's home. We'd already been in care before that. We'd been in and out of foster homes, which were an interesting mixed bag, shall I say. Some good, some not so good. And we were then brought up basically by my father, who left So he was a bit of a stranger, was my dad, having left when I was 4, according to my file, because I was on the at-risk register. We had 126 visits by the social workers, so the authorities knew how bad it was. I don't think I knew how bad it was until I actually got hold of that file myself about 10 years ago and just read about what was going on for Mum. So after Mum died, brought up by my father, who was, let's say, ill-equipped to bring up children, let alone traumatized children, and we paid the price for that. All of us, in fact.
Continued to pay the price after you lost your mum.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, what made it, I suppose, unique for us is not only had we lost a parent, and not only lost a parent in a traumatic way, the murder, but it was done by someone that became a serial killer. So it was just this, in the north of England at least, it was this very public experience that I tried my best to, find a way through and, try to be normal, but knowing deep down that I wasn't normal because I'd been through these things. And it was challenging. It was challenging. And I almost wore 2 hats. There's the hat that I pretended everything was okay, and I pretended Mum didn't die, and I had a stepmom, and so I went to school giving the impression, or trying my best to give the impression, that everything was okay, everything was normal. But looking back now 50 years later, the staff will have known what happened to Mum, and so and although they wouldn't have known what was going on at home with my father and his brutality, which just exacerbated things. He drowned the dog in the bath. He used to beat us with sticks. So we had it coming from many directions, and it just meant that I struggled at times. And what I can say is what helped me was that going to school and having some sense of escape, because I didn't know that I didn't know that they knew everything. So I thought, I'm just being like every other kid. But deep down, the other hat that I wore was inside. I knew I wasn't the same. I knew that I'd been through this, and I knew it was all being talked about. But also I felt differently. And what I thought I felt was, I've lost my mum to a serial killer. That makes me different. What I've only recently realised about 6 months ago is that I did have ADHD as well. And I wasn't that bad kid that some of the teachers thought I was, who was punished for being impulsive and spurting things out and not being able to just slow things down and let the other person speak. I was impulsive, and I got punished for that. So not only did we have that trauma before Mum died, then we had the traumatic event of my mum being murdered. Then it's a public event. Then we got my father, and there was a child with ADHD who was punished for being impulsive. And I don't mean this in some kind of egotistical way. It's a wonder that I made it through that when you consider it, all the things that I had to endure.
On that point, Richard, it's like when we think about adverse childhood experiences, so often the story is not one of your, doesn't look like your story. And so you gave us a flavour there of maybe school being part of the, I mean, what did you do? Were you helped? What happened?
Well, before that, actually, Emma, I think I'd like to know, what were the how did it show up? How did these terrible experiences that, your home life before your mum was murdered, then your home life after your mum was murdered, and how did all of this manifest? You say ADHD was something that you've only recently found out about, but that often can be, controversially, is a symptom of trauma. It can become something that trauma has kind of correlated with the neurodiverse or the exacerbation of neurodiversity. So that's obviously a way that it kind of showed up at school. But you also had you said you had some siblings. So how did the multiple traumas manifest in school? So like, for example, if there are school teachers listening to this, what are the signs and symptoms that people can pick up on to know that a child is sort of suffering from the consequences of trauma?
If I try and think back of me, that little boy, initially that first few months when I went to a new school, Miss Carr was the teacher that looked out for me. Incidentally, she's contacted me in the last few months. That's 50 years since, and I asked her, actually, sorry, I'm jumping all over the place, as I sometimes do, but I asked her what training did she get to look after a traumatized child, and she said it was her first year as a teacher. She didn't get any training. She just knew that I would need a bit of extra love. Can we use the word love? But
of course,
when you've got that chaos at home, and attention, just a kind word or even a glance from a teacher is love, and it's sometimes it's those moments that help, and did help for me. Miss Carr made me the milk monitor. You might be too young to know what that is. In the 70s, we had free milk at school, little bottles of milk, and she made me milk monitor, and it gave me that sense of, wow, I am somebody. Handing out these little bottles of milk to the kids in class. So and giving me stars for pieces of work that I didn't deserve the star for the effort, because I wasn't, not that you would need to be academic at that age, but, she just knew, I believe she knew what she was doing. She just knew I needed a bit of extra nurture. We call it equity nowadays, don't we? Some kids need a bit more than others. And she knew that. And I felt that from her. And she wasn't the only one. And there was Mrs. Birkinshaw, who always went out of her way. I won't say always. I can just remember her coming up to me in the playground to ask me how I was. And because I had this low self-esteem and felt like I was some kind of damaged individual that was never going to achieve anything, when a teacher said to me, "How are you, Richard?" it was like, what, you're asking me? I'm that damaged one, and you're actually asking me. I remember those moments. So I can't say that she did it all the time, but I remember when she did it. And I remember when she gave me her son's football boots, because she made it a business to kind of, well, be aware enough that I've got plimsolls on. Richard's got no football boots. He's going to be embarrassed if she gave me her son's football boots. Never forgot that. I was with her 6 months ago, Mrs. Birkinshaw, 44 years after she taught me. So I've got lots of little stories about those professionals that just were there and would demonstrate a little bit of kindness, a bit of love, and I am worthy. But the one that was the game changer for me was my English teacher, Mr. Hill, who saw the chatterbox in me, the little impulsive one, full of energy, as a strength, and encouraged me to take part in a school public speaking competition. I'm 13 at this point, and there was just something about the way that he spoke. I already trusted him. I liked him. I respected him. He was a nice guy, and he was always interested in what you got going on and what you're writing. And anyway, he encouraged me, and I got on that stage. I wasn't confident, but I just had the guts to get on the stage. And I gave this presentation, and I won the competition. It was a defining moment in my childhood of being told that I was the winner. And I thought, you know what, maybe I'm not damaged as much as I was. And I don't think it's a coincidence that we're talking 42 years ago. Gosh, I'm getting old. I'm 56 now. I don't think it's a coincidence that I did that he planted that seed all those years ago. And I'm now, but I've been speaking for 21 years. I'm in my 21st year, over 3,000 keynotes. Those two things are related. Not that we would have known that would have happened, but it was a seed he planted. It goes back to one of the things that children who've been traumatized need, and that is recognition and encouragement. And that's what he did for me. And again, in recent years, he joined me on stage. I interviewed him in front of 4,000 teachers at the Leeds Arena at the Teach First conference. Beautiful full circle moment. And yeah, so just a number of examples there of those teachers that just went out of their way and made me feel valued.
Okay, and I mean this, and as you say, it's so important. I think teachers that are so undervalued in the roles that they play in our lives, for sure. And I was just thinking, I was reading an article about that today. But you said the original teacher, I can't remember the name, the one who'd only had a kind of, she was in her first year of teaching.
Miss Carr.
Yeah, Miss Carr. And she obviously just intuitively knew. I think, as you say, it was a very public case. So these teachers obviously were probably more likely primed to be checking in on you more than they would another child who perhaps was undergoing some trauma at home that they wouldn't necessarily know about, the teachers wouldn't know about. But were there any signs that that you demonstrated or your siblings demonstrated that teachers or just people in general can pick up on when children are suffering from, trauma that they wouldn't necessarily know about?
Yeah, if I think back about how I was, and to some degree how I still am, I'm having to slow myself down and speak with pauses. When I was that little boy, I was kind of all over the place, and I wouldn't have been demonstrating a calm child. I would have been like looking for threat. I've done that all my life, and I still do it now. When I go into a pub, I'm looking straight away for the danger. Right? Where's the guys that might cause me some harm? So I think that hyperactivity, that looking for threat, and just not being relaxed would be a way that it would show up for us. And yeah, and I think that's just having the time and that kind of emotional awareness to see whether or not that child is calm in their movements, in their speech, in their eyes, the darting about, and if not, maybe there's something going on there. That ability to look somebody in the eye to have a conversation would have been a struggle for me as a child.
Yeah, there's a hypervigilance there that's definitely a kind of a telltale sign and symptom of trauma, I think, for sure. And what about how it's manifested? You say it's still sort of there and you're kind of taking now the time to put in pauses and you're aware of it, but how else has it manifested, this kind of trauma in your life as an adult? How have you seen it show up in relationships, in specifically relationships, I would imagine, but elsewhere in your life?
Well, yes, you're right with relationships and struggling with intimacy, but when it first showed up for me was my mental health, I suppose. So as a child, I remember having suicidal ideation. I can remember as young as 10, I'd been sent to bed for something I'd done or apparently done wrong. And I remember thinking, right, well, that's it. I'll hold my breath and die and I'll go back to mum. So having those early suicidal thoughts, I think, is where it would first show up. Not that it was obvious to people, because obviously it was just internal, but that's where, if I think back, where it first showed up. But yes, relationships was a massive thing for me. And well, first of all, I almost always needed to be in a relationship. So if somebody ended a relationship, one, I would be devastated. It was the end of the world. And I'd need to go looking for another relationship almost straight away. So if somebody ended, I'd maybe, who can I call? I didn't feel like I could be on my own. So that has been a massive problem for me. But the main way in which it impacted on me is the lack of trust. Didn't feel good enough inside to actually be in a relationship. Even though I'm not putting a brave face, I know what's going on inside. So I'm thinking, you know that I'm damaged, and eventually you're going to spot it and you're going to leave me. And somehow I would bring that relationship to an end, self-sabotage. And that's, I think, the biggest place that would show up, or has shown up in my life. And it took me years to I guess, get rid of that, and years of therapy I'm talking about, not just years passing by. So yeah, I didn't reach out and get any sort of therapy. So there's no therapy as a child. There's no counselling or anything like that. But how old was that? Probably 28, 30 when I first started that journey of reaching out and speaking to somebody. And that's because I was triggered one night watching a crime thriller on TV, and I thought I was watching my mum be killed, and I inadvertently just leapt out of the sofa where I was sitting and screaming, stop, stop, stop. And I thought, what the hell? Where's that come from? We're talking nearly 20 years. And I'd obviously tried to, I guess we do in the UK sometimes, men anyway, is try to brush it under the carpet, hope it will go away. And we all know, it doesn't go away. And it came out. But that was the start of me getting some help, because I ran Samaritans that night. And then that led to me getting years of counselling with Sandra, who is now a really good friend, actually, years later. So relationships was the main one for me. But going back to mental health as well. So wanting to take my life a number of times. 28 years ago was the closest I came to ending my life, when I'm stopping there. I was going to say formed a suicide pact. I'd just come out of prison. I ended up in prison on a drugs charge, and I was getting my house repossessed. And I literally could not imagine a way back from this. I'm getting my house repossessed. I can't get a job now. That's why I'm getting the house taken from me. I've got a criminal record. My girlfriend's ending my relationship, plus all my childhood. I just thought, and I don't even think I was depressed. There's no way back from this. And I decided I was going to end my life. So I rang up my sister, Sonia, my soulmate of a sister, to say goodbye. And she said, oh, I will come with you. And the day we discussed it, Sonia she got drunk first, and then she took 30 paracetamols, and she rang me to ask me to join her in this suicide attempt. It was like a bolt of lightning, and I rang the ambulance service, got them to Sonia's house. I'm condensing this. It took us 2 attempts. We got her into hospital, and they saved my sister. And I think essentially she saved my life, because she'd came so close. I realised, even if I've got to be homeless, surely life's worth living. And as if by magic, in that kind of 2 days before my house was repossessed, I got myself a job, and that was the start of my turnaround. That was 28 years ago, and it's been hard, but I mean, I'm just in a much better place. I couldn't have imagined being where I am today. Well, both as a child and when I came out of prison 28 years ago. But and you won't need me to tell you the statistics about people being in prison and how many of themselves experienced many ACEs. In fact, I heard many, many heartbreaking stories whilst in there.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, it's that it's such. I mean, even remove the situation with your mum from the story, which is obviously like the kind of, it's almost in the anomaly. That's the kind of, that doesn't happen to very many people at all, thank goodness. But the rest of it is like, it's still the trajectory that we see with, as you say, these ACEs, and you see, then you mentioned drugs, and you mentioned prison, and you mentioned all of this stuff that kind of, unfortunately, is so common with when young children experience that kind of trauma. And from what you're saying, it was, I mean, that incredible moment with your sister as she saved your life and kind of turned it around. Often a lot of people don't have that kind of experience, and they just don't ever change. They're not able to change the trajectory that they're set on, unfortunately, by having such high ACEs in their childhoods. Yeah. So
just to bring that story up to date, Sonia did take her life in the end in 2007, 10 years after we formed that pact. So she didn't make it. And, I think it was even more painful than losing mum, because, we went looking for mum the night she didn't come home. We sat at the bus stop and we waited. That really was our bond. And, to lose her, I mean, when I lost my mum, I was a 5-year-old boy, almost 6, and I didn't quite get the enormity of what was taking place there. But losing Sonia, after spending 39 years with her was just devastating. And knowing what I know now about aces, it's kind of no wonder that she was one of those that wouldn't make it, because, as you said, many don't.
Which I know so much of his story, but it just doesn't. I don't know. It's just when you hear it played back, it can't help but just have this kind of reverberation. And I guess I've got so many questions coming forward, but we spoke briefly about what happened to you at school, and it reminded me of a conversation we had with, I don't know if you know Katrina O'Sullivan, who recently wrote a book called Poor, about how teachers can totally shift the trajectory of somebody's life. And and we talked a lot with her about how you can spot this in early education. But I'm also sort of questioning outside of school. So there was that tipping point at 13 when you had that stage moment, which gave you that kind of internal confidence that there was. Were there people? Were there things? Were there interventions? Were there anything that happened that you can say, we like those little hallmarks in the school, Miss Carr, that English teacher? Were there other things that I'm trying to think? Can we equip the people listening who might be working with those, dealing with the consequences and the fallout of adverse childhood experiences? And unfortunately, we're seeing more of that and more compounded, complex issues that they can do, practical things from your experience that shift someone's trajectory.
I think the big one for me, and it came when I was 13 with the public speaking competition, it's giving a child that belief that many of them don't have because of what's going on around them. And so I didn't have that self-belief, and sometimes we need to borrow that belief off the adults around us by you believing in them and repeatedly telling them that they can do it, whatever that may be, or they can get through it even. That belief needs to come from the significant others, teachers, and sometimes your parents. I didn't get it from my parents. I did not get self-belief from my parents, but I did from those kind of professionals. So that would be the big one for me, and that recognition as well, that recognizing the little things that they did. In fact, I remember when I was at school, aged about 10, Sanford Middle School, I was recognised and it felt great. What I did was I was summer fair or spring fair, probably spring fair, whenever they do the maypole dancing, is that spring? But it was some kind of summer fair at school, and somebody didn't turn up to do the dancing, and they needed even numbers, I believe. So one of the teachers said, "Richard, would you help us out with somebody missing?" I went, "Oh yeah, go on, I'll do that." And at the end of the school year, I got a certificate, for an award for services to the school or something. So they recognised me. I'd forgotten what am I doing getting an award? And they reminded me that I did that. It's not a little thing, but it took somebody to remember to look out for how can we give Richard a little something to recognise him. So and it doesn't need to be an award. It could just be a few kind words about, I see what you did there, or I see how you've been kind. Those little moments can make a difference. But it's got to be constant. It's got to be like a consistent message from everybody, not just the odd teacher. We need everybody on the same page.
Well, that was what I was going to say as well. And it kind of, it's that consistency, isn't it? You said the word repeated, consistent, and then it reminded me of your therapist who you started seeing when you were 27 or 28, Sandra, who you said that you're still friends with now. It's that relational, that person that you can rely on. You haven't had any, obviously your mum wasn't there, so you couldn't rely on her. You haven't been able to rely on your dad as a child, so you've been in and out of foster care. It's like, who is that person that you can rely on? And I think if teachers can be just the reliable, they're there, that they're going to be there with a smile. There's nothing more than that. It's just that day in, day out, you're going to school and they will be there. Same with Sandra. You've got a therapy session with her. She's going to be there. She's going to show up in the way that you expect her to. It's just that reliable relationship building, which will allow us to kind of trust. You said you lost that trust in someone else, that someone else is there for you, I think is important.
I think the other thing I'm reminded of the whole way through, the more of these kinds of conversations that I have, it's that thing about asking not what's wrong with someone when they're showing up dysregulated or running around or they're doing bad things or they're hurting other people, but what happened to you, and that keeps kind of because the consequence of in behaviors, in how people show up, in how they connect or relate, that all is coming through in that just compassion, I think, that's often missing if we look in the mainstream media, when we look at how this kind of good bad narrative, it's too simplistic for the complexity that we live in.
Yeah, I think, yeah, you're right, because we all do bad things. I mean, I mean, I broke into my primary school. I broke into Kirkstall Brewery. I was shoplifting. Should I have been condemned? I'll tell you what, there's an interesting conversation taking place. I went into HMP Hull a few weeks ago, and I called in my post, I called them residents, because that's a bit more of a more trauma-informed way of describing them. And it went viral because of how people were offended that I'd called them residents, and of the opinion that they should be lock them up and throw away the key. And what they're not, I'm not making excuses for people, but the facts are most of them have been through a number of traumatic events as a child. And if we could change the world if we were only intervening compassionately at a younger age, consistently. It's not a one-hit wonder thing, this. So, I mean, I've not got the answer. I'm not a politician. And I just know that not all the teachers were kind to me. I won't name names, but one did drag me over my desk and threw me by my hair. And I ran out of school and went home, and Dad came to school the next day, and the kids in class weren't even questioned. I was told I was a liar, and I didn't make it up. But anyway, so they weren't all great. And going back to relationships, I thought I had a great relationship with him. So great that I could have a bit of banter with him, and that's all it was. I said something, he couldn't take it, and physically violent to me. Anyway, that's very rare these days, isn't it? Rightfully so.
Yeah. So, Richard, in terms of now, what is it with the ICANN Academy then? It sounds like you spend your time working with, talk to us about the work that you do now and where you show up and how that's, the books and what it is. Where are you focusing your life's work now?
My life's work, actually. So I'm a keynote speaker. That's what I do. And I speak for generic audiences. I'm a presentation skills coach, but it's of late that I've been getting booked more and more within education, just because I think my story and what I experienced is just so relevant, and the fact that I made it through there. So that's where I'm spending more of a time, which is why I'm writing a book at the moment called Teach Me Gently. It's about that gentle, caring, compassionate, loving side. And the reason that I've been inspired to do this, well, for two reasons. One was the suicide of a child that I was supposed to speak to and didn't get to speak to her, and not to her, to the school. And me and the staff member devastated that we didn't get to expose her to, I guess, my journey, in particular, the bounce back graph. So this is quite simple. My life has gone like this. In the green, I'm in the red, I'm in the green. And I've been doing this for 15 years in corporate. I get people to chart their own life. I've never found a person yet that hasn't been through some stuff, hasn't found themselves into the red. And what I wanted to share, and do share nowadays, is that there's always a way back from those adverse experiences, not just childhood ones, but you might need some professional help. My point is, I wish I'd exposed her to that notion that there's always a way back. On the flip side to that, you never stay in the green either, so you savor those moments. But so this book, Teach Me Gently, was inspired by that happening alongside my own daughter with severe anxiety. There's like a epidemic at the moment of anxiety in young people, and my own child had to have 6 months out of school and move to another school, and even that was a challenge, but she's doing okay now. But I've learned some lessons, this is just in the last 12 months, about how I handled her and her anxiety. And for example, getting her to school and sitting in the car park with her while she's crying for an hour, but then say, listen, I've got to go, I've got a Zoom at 10 o'clock. What that's not going to help her. What she needed, what I now know, is that she needed to feel safe. And when they feel safe, then we can get on with the day. And I got that wrong. And I still see lots of people getting it wrong as well. So I feel quite passionate about, that book, probably more passionate than my first book, which started this whole journey. Going back to that book, the first book, that was when I finally felt, is the word liberated? Yes, let's call it probably a bit, I'm not very academic, but let's say liberated. I was always ashamed of being associated with this, well, ashamed of my mum, actually, in some ways, ashamed of what they said about her, a good time girl, and then who he was. But writing the book was a start of, being authentic and leading me to doing what I'm doing today. And I think if anybody can come across any of my stuff and be helped in some way, it just means to me that, mum's loss wasn't in vain.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's more than that. I think you turn in what is lived experience into something that is practical, helpful and practical in so many ways, against a backdrop of increased, generalized anxiety because of the way that we're living,
I have a question. I don't know if it's on my mind because I'm in the middle of reading it, or just finished reading it. Have you read a book called Trauma Industrial Complex by Darren McGarvey?
No.
And so he's fairly new. He's kind of exploded onto the trauma scene, I suppose. He wrote a book before that called Poverty Safari. And he talked about, and it kind of struck a chord for me about this, when we share our stories of trauma, how the world, and I especially imagine your story in particular, the world can just take it and run with it and make it, like you just mentioned about what the media said about your mum and what they said about, and how that kind of impacts, because that's once you put your story out there, it's kind of like, it's not yours anymore. It's like the world takes it and it takes different shapes and it goes. And how does that impact us or people who are already traumatized? When we give our stories to the world, to, as Emma said, it's been massively helpful and impactful, and you've changed probably so many lives. But how then for your own lives or for your life, the lives of your family, does that impact? And if you're not ready, I think that his kind of word of caution is there's people who are quite traumatized who will share their stories before they're ready to perhaps be able to share their stories, and then the world takes them and then they cannot deal with the kind of repercussions of that. I wonder if, yeah, you can speak to that.
There's so many things going on there, but first of all, in my case, yes, I wrote that book about my life 21 years ago and my story became public. However, my story, or what happened to Mum, that's always been public. It was taken from us. We couldn't like live in our own house. It was everywhere. So there's mine's a slightly complicated version of what you're saying, but I do appreciate that sometimes I've seen it myself. I've seen people share their stories from the stage. I'm burst into tears and have to run off the stage, and I would question whether or not that was handled properly or whether. So yes, there is a time and a place, and sometimes people, I'm talking about on the stage here, are not ready for that or haven't thought through the consequences. If I think about my own book, and it is a long time ago, when my book came out, there was lots of people, they called them misery memoirs, people that had been through trauma and something and found a way back. And I know this, having met some along the way, that the publishers who've taken their story and made it this commercial thing and put it out there have not always looked after them after the event. And well, thankfully, there's not so many of those misery memoirs being written now. But of course, we know that the lives of people are still, the kind of life that featured in those books are still taking place, aren't they? And so what's the point there? Well, they could be a bit more compassionate. I would ask anybody to tread carefully when sharing their personal journey, and I won't go into detail now, but I've had lots of negative repercussions from I guess from family really, who were not happy that I'd shared that so publicly. But I did what I did.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. And you, as you said, yours was already out in the public domain. There wasn't, it is different to a lot of people's, but I think there is I guess it just gave, when I've been reading this book, it kind of gave me pause, because I think a lot of, it feels cathartic to write your story to kind of, and then you want to share it, I guess, because it's kind of thing you think, because it can have such positive impact. But once it goes out, I think as I said, the word of caution there is once it's out there, you don't have control over it anymore. And you might have had control writing it, but then you said the splashback that comes from your own family, from other people around you, people close to you who, it can be, then that can become more traumatizing. And I think it is for those survivor stories or those lived experience stories, I would say it's just something to think about. And I had never thought about it before until I'd read this book. And so I think I was interested in hearing your experience of that and knowing that also, you'd already been in the public eye already.
I mean, it's been mostly positive, I have to say. Overwhelmingly positive, but I have had some incidents over the years. I'm talking about trolls now. Once you're contactable, I mean, we've had messages to the office, whatever to say, but people pretending to be Mum's killer from phoning from prison and just all sorts of unbelievable behaviour. But on the whole, it's been a positive experience, and it's been a life-changing experience for me. I'm no longer ashamed of my mum and ashamed of that picture of mum that used to be shown. I just, it wasn't the mum that I remembered. It was a picture of my mum when she was 18. It's this black and white grainy image which makes her look like Myra Hindley, and it's just, well, anyway, it's not the mum. But actually, with AI, I've enhanced that picture. I wish I could show you it, and it's actually a beautiful picture now in colour with a little smile on her face. So the wonders of AI, you bring those pictures back to life in a positive way.
Yeah, it's an incredible story, Richard, and just the work that you're doing is really, really inspiring. Like you say, you didn't have a choice, and just being able to perpetuate the impact of your own experiences in this way is is really inspirational. And I would like to, I mean, we could just keep talking. I've got so many things that are kind of coming forward, but I think in an effort to sort of wrap today's conversation up, what we are speaking about in Oxford this year is science, spirit, and the body as the sort of synthesis for healing. And spirit is often, a word that in this space, there's lots of skepticism and there's lots of kind of question. But I just wonder if you could say what, or if that's played a part in your own journey or your own experience of this space and your work.
I could give you a 2-hour answer to that, because I'm absolutely, I believe, spiritually aware and have become spiritually aware. And I've actually had miracles take place on my journey, including, I believe, whilst giving a Zoom about spirituality, the lights are flickering and then lights appearing on screen going around my head, which I couldn't even see. And I'm talking about angels and such like, and people are saying, what's that around your head? I've got that captured. I might send it to you afterwards. So I believe, I mean, if you think about post-traumatic growth and the different domains, one of those is that increased kind of intuition or belief in that spiritual realm. My mum died, and just after she died, I remember telling myself that she's been taken by God to stop her suffering and to give me and my 3 sisters a better life. So I kind of started thinking in that kind of spiritualish way back then. But in more recent years, I'm talking the last 20 years, incredible things have happened in my life which make me believe that mum our life did not end when she died, and she continues in that spiritual realm. Me and Sonia, I did have a picture of me and Sonia. I was going to show you me and her as a kid, which shouldn't have come on screen. There it is. Me and Sonia, we always had a thing. Can you see that there? Yeah. That was just before mum died. We had this thing about the number 44, and we would share stories all the time about the number 44. It just did something to us, and we loved it. You can imagine my surprise when I worked out that mum died on the 30th of October, 1975. It's week 44. Peter Sutcliffe lived at house number 44, Tanton Crescent, the night he killed my mum. And he was employee number 44 of 49 at Clark's, where he worked. I've only discovered this recently. So 44 is this spiritual thing that just crops up everywhere. From the family home to where my mum lived is 444 miles door to door up on the Isle of Skye. And so I've had these miracle things happen around me, and I just take it as like comfort that, as I said, mum's spirit continues. But the one that was the game changer for me was when those lights were appearing around my head on that Zoom. I will send it to you, by the way. So yeah, I believe that spiritual belief has been right there, right from the start, helping me. And you know what? It might be that I get to the end of my journey and it's been a load of rubbish and there isn't a spiritual realm. Well, it's helped me believe there is. And so it won't matter when we get to that point. I don't believe that will happen. I will believe that when I go, I'll get to understand what it's all about. And in my latest book in the trilogy, which is called Just a Man, which is available for free to anybody that wants it, just contact me and I'll send it to you. I talk about all the spiritual side to my journey. There's too much to share, but there's been miracles happen over the years that just give me that comfort that mum stood around and guided me.
I think you being here talking to us today is one of those miracles, so really.
Think so?
I think so, yeah.
For sure. Thank you, Richard. You've been really generous with your time and with what you've shared. Yeah, I think we could have just carried on for the next couple of hours and still had plenty to talk about. So yes, on behalf of our listeners and yeah, thanks for the work that you're doing, and thank you for sharing that with us today.
Pleasure. Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right.
You speak soon. See you later. Bye.